Okay, so this last section in chapter 6.7, is all about areas of different types of quadrilaterals. And so basically what we're going to do in this chapter is we're going to go through and essentially just list what all of the different area formulas for different type of quadrilaterals are. Okay, so for example, this first one is postulate 22, so you can find this on your postulate sheet. The area of a square is the square of the lengths of its sides. This is a rule you all know, but if one of its sides is called S, then the area of a square is going to be S times S, length times width, this side times that side, which is the same as S squared, or the square of one of its sides. If I know the length of one side of a square, I can find its area very easily just by squaring that side. Postulate 23 says this: if two polygons are congruent, then they have the same area. That you should be able to recognize right away why that is a postulate. Clearly that makes a lot of sense and is very logical, that if there are two polygons that are exactly the same, then their areas should be exactly the same. And this is a postulate that you have come in contact with before, but once again, we introduce it into something like a postulate so that you can use it in formal argument. And postulate 24 says this: the area of a region, and so in this case, this pentagon, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is our quote-unquote region, is the sum of the areas of the non-overlapping parts. Here's all this means. There's not exactly an area formula that we know to be able to find the area of this shape. But what we can do is we can draw an imaginary line. I'm going to draw it as a dotted line right there. And if I can find the area of this shape on its own right here, and if I can find the area of this shape on its own, because those are easier, one's a triangle, one's a rectangle, and it's easier to find the area of those, then I can add them together, sum, and I will get the area of the whole thing. Okay, so that's postulate 22, 23, 24. You should see why they're postulates. They all kind of make sense. Theorem 6.20, the area of a rectangle is the product of its base and its height. So in this specific example, it's calling these two sides the bases, and in a rectangle, remember the opposite, it's a parallelogram, so the opposite sides are going to be congruent. So we could call them both a base, so we just need one of them. And it's calling this side and this side right here, so that's a B, the height. So the area is going to be the product, which means I'm multiplying, of the base and the height. Okay, this is a rule that you all should already know to be true. And now we kind of get into the tricky ones, or the ones that are not tricky, but they're just a little bit different. The area of a parallelogram is the product of, guess what? Its base and its height. So the area formula is exactly the same. But if we look at this parallelogram, it's not exactly clear where the height is. This, if you see, is not the height. That's a slanted line, and the height is always going to be a straight line directly up and down. So here we might actually have to do some work to find this parallelogram's height. But if I were to draw the height, it would be this straight line distance right there. Okay, that is the height. So in a parallelogram, if it's not a rectangle or a square, I might actually have to do some work to find the height of the parallelogram. But all that said, the area of a parallelogram is still the base times the height. Okay, here we go. The area of a triangle is 1/2 the product of its base and height. This is a formula that you know. Area is 1/2 base times height. But once again, kind of like the parallelogram, sometimes it's very clear where the height is in the triangle, and other times it's not. For example, on this triangle right here, this bottom side would be the base, and right here would be the height. Down here, this bottom side would be the base. That's that bottom down there. But here, the height is from the highest point of the triangle to straight line to the base. So the height is actually right here. That is what represents the height. It's not this side length. And here, the tallest point of this triangle is right here, and the base a place that is even with the base is if I draw a straight line down right there. That is how tall this triangle is, whereas this would be the base. So remember, the one thing you need to take away from this is anytime it says height in an area formula, that's referring to the straight line up and down distance, just directly up and down. Okay, so there are some area formulas. Here, what we have some here is some different area practice problems, and what I want you to do is I actually want you to do these on your own, and when you do them, come and check them with me. I'll make sure that they're correct. But here we have a rectangle, a parallelogram, and then two triangles that I want you to find their areas of, and then come check me when you're done. They're not too difficult. You just need to use those area formulas above. Okay. Now there are two more shapes that we need to go over the area formulas for, so we're going to do that now. First is it's trapezoid. Okay. The area of a trapezoid is 1/2, so 1/2, the product, so we're multiplying, of the height and the sum of the bases. Okay, so times the height. So remember, the height is a straight line up and down distance. So in this trapezoid, that's right there. And the sum of the bases. So we're going to need to use parentheses here because we're adding two things together. Remember, in a trapezoid, the bases are the parallel sides. So here's one base. I'm going to call that B1. And here's another base. I'm going to call that B2. So the area is the product of the height of 1/2, the height, and the sum of the bases. So I'm going to be multiplying 1/2 times the height times B1 plus B2. Okay? And that is the area formula for a trapezoid. When I write area, capital A, and then I write a little subscript T, that's saying the area of a trapezoid. Okay? All right, and what about a kite? Well, the area of a kite is going to be 1/2 the product of the lengths of its diagonals. So again, we have area of a kite is 1/2 times the product of the length of the diagonals. So here's one diagonal. I'm going to call that D1. And here's another diagonal. I'm going to call that D2. And the area of a kite is going to be 1/2 times D1 times D2. Okay, pretty straightforward. Moving right along. And the area of a rhombus is 1/2 the product of the lengths of its diagonals. So once again, a rhombus is just like a kite. We have our two diagonals, and the area of a rhombus is going to be 1/2 times one diagonal times another diagonal. Okay? Not too complicated. But remember, a rhombus is also a parallelogram, which means, if you remember, the area of a parallelogram is base times height. So if it's easier for me to use base times height, I can find the area of a rhombus using either of these formulas. Okay, so what we have on this next slide are a bunch of practice problems. On the next two slides, we have a bunch of area practice problems for trapezoids and for kites and for maybe some parallelograms or maybe some rhombuses. I want you to find the area of each of these figures, and then I want everybody to go ahead and try and find the area of this figure as well. Okay, so do all of those, come and check them with me, and when you have done that, we can move on. Thank you.